Stains. I'm a terrified. Alright, get out of here. Wear this Farquaad right now and get you all off my lawn.
You and the rest of that fairy tale trash.
Me today's eligible bachelorettes. Aye, where she is. Come on, give it up for Snow.
Picked king. Captain, assemble your finest men.
Second. Look, I'm not gonna eat you.
Welcome to Duloc, such a perfect time.
Oh, hey, now come on.
All right, ogre, I'll make you a deal. Go on this quest for me.
No, not really, no. Thanks.
Ogres,
Brimstone, I know what I smell. There wasn't no brimstone. Then come off.
tackle this thing together one little baby step at a time.
I'm gonna die.
Up. Now go over there and see if you can.
Sparkling tea. I know you probably hear this all the time from your.
Awaiting a night so bold.
The story begins with a beautiful princess trapped inside a dark castle, waiting for true love to break her terrible curse. It sounds romantic, magical, even. Then a huge green hand tears the page from the book. Because this is not that kind of fairy tale. Not yet. Deep inside a lonely swamp lives Shrek, an ogre feared by everyone who has never bothered to know him. He bathes in mud, brushes his teeth with insects, and enjoys every disgusting moment of his peaceful life. No visitors, no judgment, no one staring at him like he is a monster. That silence is the only treasure he has. But beyond the swamp, frightened villagers whisper about the creature hiding among the trees. One night, carrying torches and farming tools, they gather enough courage to hunt him. Their boots sink into the wet ground. Branches scrape against their shoulders. Every shadow looks alive. Then Shrek appears behind them, calm, almost amused. The men freeze as he describes in horrible detail what an ogre might do to foolish humans. He roars. The sound shakes leaves from the trees. Torches fall into the mud. The villagers run for their lives, never realizing Shrek could have crushed them easily. He only wanted them gone. Far away, another creature is being hunted for a very different reason. A nervous old woman tries to sell her talking donkey to soldiers working for Lord Farquaad, the ruler of Duloc. Donkey refuses to speak, but when a burst of fairy dust sends him flying, fear knocks the words straight out of him. The guards hear everything, a talking animal. One more magical creature to capture. Donkey hits the ground and runs. Hooves pound against the dirt. Spears flash behind him. He crashes through bushes, gasping, joking, begging the universe for help. Then he slams into something enormous. Shrek. The soldiers surround them, but the ogre's face is enough to drain the courage from every man. Seconds later, the guards are fleeing. Donkey stares up at Shrek like he has just found a hero. Shrek sees only a new problem. He orders Donkey to leave. Donkey follows. Shrek walks faster. Donkey talks faster. He praises Shrek's strength, his size, even his terrifying smell. Shrek growls, threatens, and tries to frighten him away. Nothing works. Donkey has spent his life being rejected, sold, and chased. Compared with everyone else, an angry ogre feels strangely safe. At the edge of the swamp, Shrek finally allows Donkey to stay outside for one night. Just outside. Not inside the house. Donkey agrees, though silence lasts only a few seconds. Shrek shuts the door and settles into the familiar comfort of solitude. Fire crackles. Dinner steams. The world feels normal again. Then something crashes through his roof. A tiny wooden puppet lands on the floor, insisting he is a real boy. Shrek throws him outside, but the swamp is no longer empty. 3 blind mice stumble across the table. A wolf wearing an old woman's clothes lies in Shrek's bed. Witches, bears, elves, pigs, and countless fairy tale creatures crowd every patch of mud. Voices overlap. Babies cry. Animals argue. The peaceful swamp becomes a noisy refugee camp. Shrek storms outside, furious enough to make the crowd fall silent. He demands to know why they are there. At first, nobody answers. Then the puppet nervously explains that Lord Farquaad has banished every magical creature from his kingdom. Armed soldiers drag them from their homes and dump them here. Shrek looks around at the frightened faces. They are unwanted, hated for what they are, just like him. For one brief moment, something shifts behind his eyes. Then anger covers it. Their pain may be familiar, but this swamp is his home, and he refuses to lose the only place where he can exist without being judged. He announces that he will confront Farquaad personally and force him to remove them. The creatures cheer. Shrek immediately regrets sounding heroic. Donkey volunteers to guide him to Duloc, mostly because no one else dares to travel beside an ogre. By morning, the two are walking away from the swamp. Shrek in heavy silence, Donkey filling every empty second with songs and questions. Shrek believes this will be simple. Find Farquaad, make a threat, reclaim his home. But inside Duloc's towering castle, Lord Farquaad is already searching for a princess to marry. A magical mirror shows him 3 possible brides. One of them is Princess Fiona, imprisoned in a distant tower guarded by a fire-breathing dragon. Farquaad chooses her without hesitation, though he has no intention of risking his own life. Instead, he plans to send someone else, and the perfect monster is already walking toward his gates. Duloc rises from the countryside like a polished toy kingdom. Perfect walls, perfect streets, perfect silence, too perfect. Shrek and Donkey enter expecting guards, crowds, maybe a royal welcome. Instead, they find empty courtyards and cheerful music playing from wooden dolls that suddenly burst into song. Donkey claps along. Shrek stares at the smiling figures with growing suspicion. The performance ends with a camera flash exploding in their faces. For one strange second, neither of them moves. Then Shrek crushes the information booth with one furious shove. Somewhere beyond those spotless walls, thousands of voices roar inside an arena. Whatever Lord Farquaad is planning, it has already begun. At the center of Duloc, armored knights battle for the honor of rescuing Princess Fiona. Farquaad watches from a high balcony, tiny legs hidden behind the stone railing, his chin lifted like a conquering king. The winner will cross dangerous lands, enter the dragon's castle, and bring Fiona back so Farquaad can marry her and become a true ruler. The knights cheer, hungry for glory. Then Shrek and Donkey step into the arena. The cheering stops. Farquaad recognizes the ogre immediately, not as a person, but as another creature that does not belong in his perfect kingdom. He orders every knight to kill him. Metal scrapes. Swords rise. Shrek quietly tells Donkey to run. Donkey does not need convincing. The knights charge, expecting an easy victory against one clumsy monster. They are wrong. Shrek swings, chains, hurls barrels, bends weapons, and sends armored men crashing into walls. The arena becomes chaos. Donkey hides, screams advice, then accidentally knocks one knight unconscious with his hooves. The crowd begins to cheer. Not for Farquaad, for Shrek. With every fallen soldier, the ruler's smile grows tighter. He wanted a monster destroyed. Instead, the monster has become the most popular fighter in Duloc. When the final night collapses, Shrek demands the return of his swamp. Farquaad's eyes narrow. Killing the ogre failed, but perhaps Shrek can still be useful. He offers a deal. Rescue Princess Fiona, and every fairy tale creature will be removed from the swamp. Shrek hates the idea. He hates Farquaad more. But beneath the anger sits a desperate image. His quiet home, empty again, safe again. He accepts. Farquaad smiles, pleased that the creature he despises will risk death for him. Donkey watches Shrek carefully. The ogre pretends this is only business, but something about that bargain feels like a trap closing around them. Their journey begins beneath an open sky. Donkey talks about the princess, imagining beauty, romance, and royal rewards. Shrek cuts him off. He does not care what Fiona looks like. He does not care whether she loves Farquaad. He only wants his swamp back. When Donkey asks why Shrek lives alone, the ogre's steps grow heavier. He finally explains that people judge him before he speaks. They see claws, teeth, green skin, and decide he is cruel. Donkey suggests Shrek is like an onion, with hidden layers beneath the surface. Shrek likes the comparison. For a moment, his voice softens. Then Donkey asks whether ogres smell when left in the sun, and the moment dies. After days of walking, the landscape turns black. The air tastes of smoke. Jagged rocks surround a lake of glowing lava, and above it stands a crumbling castle wrapped in clouds. A narrow bridge stretches across the fire, swaying with every gust of hot wind. Donkey stops. His ears flatten. His legs lock. Shrek steps onto the bridge without hesitation, but Donkey cannot follow. The lava bubbles below like an open mouth. Shrek returns and promises they will cross together. Halfway across, Donkey looks down. Panic hits. The bridge shakes beneath them. Shrek grabs him, talks him forward, and slowly guides him to the other side. Inside the castle, silence presses against the stone halls. Skeletons hang from chains. Broken shields lie scattered across the floor. The smell is worse than smoke. Burned cloth, old bones, something animal. Shrek tells Donkey to search for stairs while he finds Fiona. They separate. Bad idea. Donkey wanders into a vast chamber filled with gold, jewels, and shattered armor. A low growl rolls through the darkness. Two enormous eyes open above him. The dragon steps into the firelight. Donkey runs, but one sweep of her tail sends him crashing into a wall. Flames gather inside her throat. With nowhere left to hide, Donkey does the only thing his terrified mind can manage. He compliments her. Her teeth, her eyes, her beauty. The flames fade, the dragon smiles. Meanwhile, Shrek climbs the tower and finds Princess Fiona sleeping beneath a silk canopy, waiting for the romantic kiss promised by every fairy tale. Instead, Shrek shakes her awake and orders her to move. Fiona stares at him, stunned. This is not the handsome knight she imagined. This is an ogre covered in dust. Then a deafening roar shakes the tower. Shrek looks toward the doorway. Donkey has found the dragon, and somehow the dragon has fallen in love with him. The castle erupts into chaos. Dragons roar tears through the stone corridors as Shrek drags Fiona down the tower stairs, with Donkey racing behind them and begging his enormous admirer to calm down. Fire explodes against the walls. Chains snap. Towers tremble. Fiona expects her rescuer to fight like a noble knight, but Shrek survives by smashing doors, swinging from ropes, and running whenever the flames get too close. At the broken bridge, Dragon corners them. Heat crawls across their skin. Shrek spots a hanging chain, leaps, and catches it with both hands. The trap tightens around Dragon's neck, holding her back just long enough for the three of them to escape. Outside, Fiona immediately stops and waits. Shrek asks what she is doing. She explains that her heroic rescuer is supposed to remove his helmet and reveal his handsome face. Shrek refuses. Fiona insists. Donkey grins, eager to watch. With an irritated sigh, Shrek removes the metal helmet. Fiona's smile disappears. Her eyes move across his green skin, round ears, and heavy jaw. She tries to hide the shock, but Shrek sees it. He always sees it. The same pause, the same frightened stare. Before she can recover, he explains that Lord Farquaad sent him. Fiona's disappointment deepens. She was not rescued by her true love, only delivered like a prize. Fiona refuses to move until she understands why Farquaad did not come himself. Shrek tells her about the tournament and the bargain for his swamp. The princess looks from the ogre to the talking donkey, wondering how her perfect fairy tale became this. But as evening approaches, something stranger happens. Fiona watches the sinking sun with sudden terror. Her fingers tighten around her dress. She demands they find shelter immediately. Shrek notices the fear in her voice, but when he asks what is wrong, she claims princesses simply need privacy after dark. It sounds weak, forced. Still, she locks herself inside a ruined windmill and warns them not to enter. Shrek and Donkey settle near a fire. Donkey jokes about Fiona's strange behavior, then asks Shrek what he really thinks of her. Shrek pretends she is annoying, spoiled, and far too demanding. Yet his voice changes when he remembers her face. Donkey catches it instantly. Shrek denies everything. An ogre and a princess? Ridiculous. Donkey does not laugh. He tells Shrek that Fiona seemed comfortable around him by the end of the day. Shrek stares into the flames. For years, he has convinced himself he prefers loneliness. It hurts less when no one is allowed close enough to leave. But now one question will not disappear. What happens when someone finally sees beneath the monster? Morning comes, and Fiona steps from the windmill looking perfectly composed. Too perfectly. She smiles as though the panic from the night before never happened. Shrek watches her, suspicious, but they continue toward Duloc. Along the road, Fiona surprises them. She sings with a bird so beautifully that the creature tries to match her highest note and explodes. Silence. A pair of cooked eggs drops into the nest below. Fiona calmly serves them for breakfast. Donkey stares. Shrek laughs. It is the first time she has heard that sound from him, deep and unguarded, and something in her expression softens. Later they encounter Robin Hood and his band of cheerful thieves. Robin assumes Fiona is being held captive by Shrek and launches into a dramatic song about rescuing her. Fiona politely asks him to stop. He does not. So she attacks. Her dress spins through the air as she kicks, flips, and knocks every outlaw unconscious. Shrek and Donkey watch in disbelief. Fiona lands gracefully, straightens her hair, and asks whether they are ready to continue. Shrek smiles. The princess is not fragile. She is not predictable. And for the first time, he begins to wonder whether the life waiting for her in Duloc is really what she wants. That evening, Shrek and Fiona talk beneath the stars. He explains how people run from ogres before knowing them. Fiona listens without interrupting. Her hand brushes his. Neither pulls away immediately. Donkey watches from a distance, certain that something real is forming between them. But Fiona sees the sunset and abruptly retreats into an abandoned barn. The warmth vanishes from her face. She locks the door. Donkey hears movement inside, a heavy footstep, a frightened breath. Then a voice, Fiona's voice, begging him to leave. He pushes the door open. The princess is gone. Standing in the moonlight is a green ogress wearing Fiona's torn dress. Donkey stumbles backward, eyes wide, but Fiona grabs his arm before he can scream. Her face is still hers, yet everything else has changed. Green skin, broad shoulders, round ears. An ogress. She begs him to stay quiet. Donkey slowly realizes the truth. Every sunset, Fiona transforms into the creature she fears most. Years ago, a witch cursed her to live by day as a princess and by night as an ogress. Only true love's first kiss can reveal her permanent form. Fiona has always believed that form will be beautiful, human, and worthy of a king. Donkey listens, but pity soon turns to frustration. Fiona speaks about her ogre body like it is something shameful, something no one could ever love. He reminds her of Shrek. The two of them laugh together, understand each other, and hide pain behind the same sharp temper. Fiona's eyes lower. That is exactly what frightens her. She has fallen for him. But she cannot imagine Shrek wanting her after seeing what she becomes. Donkey insists she must tell him before Farquaad arrives. Fiona refuses. The confession sticks in her throat like a bone. Rejection would hurt more than any curse. Outside the barn, Shrek approaches carrying a sunflower. He spent half the night gathering courage, rehearsing words he has never spoken to anyone. His hands are damp. His chest feels too tight. Then he hears Fiona's voice through the door. Who could ever love something so hideous and ugly? Shrek freezes. He cannot see her transformed body. He cannot hear the fear behind her words. He only hears what he has expected his entire life. The flower slips from his hand. Whatever hope had opened inside him closes at once. Of course she meant him. Princesses do not love ogres. They tolerate them until a real prince arrives. Shrek walks away before Donkey can answer, each heavy step crushing the foolish dream he almost allowed himself to believe. At sunrise, Fiona returns to human form and steps outside, ready at last to speak with Shrek. But his warmth is gone. His voice is cold, clipped, almost cruel. Before she can explain, trumpets echo across the field. Lord Farquaad arrives with soldiers, banners, and a carriage built for celebration. He barely reaches Fiona's shoulder, yet he poses like the hero who crossed fire to save her. Shrek stands aside while Farquaad takes credit for everything. Fiona keeps looking back at the ogre, waiting for him to stop her. He says nothing. Farquaad proposes immediately. Fiona hesitates. The sun is already moving across the sky, and she cannot risk being seen after dark. She accepts on one condition. The wedding must happen before sunset. Farquaad agrees, delighted by her urgency. To him it looks like love. To Shrek, it looks like proof that he was never more than a servant completing a task. The carriage rolls toward Duloc. Fiona presses a hand against the window, watching Shrek disappear behind the trees. He watches until the dust settles, then turns away as though nothing inside him has broken. The swamp is his again. That was the bargain. That was all he wanted. Except the silence no longer feels peaceful. Back home, every fairy tale creature is gone. The mud is still. The fire crackles without interruption. Shrek sits alone at his table, surrounded by everything he fought to recover, and cannot enjoy any of it. Donkey arrives, angry that Shrek abandoned Fiona without saying goodbye. Shrek orders him out. Donkey refuses. He demands half the swamp as payment for helping with the rescue. Their argument turns vicious. Shrek accuses Donkey of betraying him. Donkey fires back that Shrek pushes everyone away before they can hurt him. Then Donkey realizes what happened. Shrek heard the conversation. He thinks Fiona called him ugly. Donkey's anger disappears. He tells Shrek that Fiona was not talking about him. She was talking about herself. Shrek stares, confused. Donkey explains the curse, the transformations, the secret Fiona was too frightened to reveal. Every word tears apart the lie Shrek built around his pain. She did not reject him. She loved him and believed he would reject her. Far away, wedding bells begin ringing in Duloc. The sun is falling, and Shrek has only minutes to stop Fiona from marrying the wrong man. Shrek does not waste another second. He grabs Donkey by the shoulders and demands to know how they can reach Duloc before sunset. Donkey's anger has not completely vanished, but he sees the terror behind Shrek's eyes. This is no longer about a swamp. It is about losing the one person who looked at Shrek without fear. Donkey tells him there may be one way, fast, dangerous, and painfully awkward. A shadow passes over the trees. Wind tears through the branches. Shrek looks up. Dragon lands in the swamp. She has followed Donkey. The enormous creature lowers her head, purring smoke through her nostrils, while Donkey tries to act as though this was always part of the plan. Shrek has no time to question it. He climbs onto Dragon's back, pulls Donkey up behind him, and points toward Duloc. With one powerful beat of her wings, the swamp drops away beneath them. Trees blur into green rivers. Clouds strike Shrek's face like cold water. Far ahead, the castle towers shine in the dying light. Inside Duloc's cathedral, every seat is filled. Nobles sit in perfect rows. Soldiers guard every door. Lord Farquaad stands at the altar wearing a crown far too large for his head, smiling at the kingdom he believes is finally his. Fiona walks down the aisle in a white gown, but her eyes are fixed on the stained glass windows. The sunlight has turned orange. Soon it will disappear. The priest begins the ceremony. Fiona barely hears him. Her heartbeat pounds beneath the music. She remembers Shrek laughing beside the fire. His awkward kindness. The way he looked at her when she fought Robin Hood. She remembers every chance she had to tell him the truth, and every time fear closed her mouth. Farquaad reaches for her hand. His fingers are cold. Outside, Dragon dives toward Duloc. The city walls rush closer. Guards spot the creature and ring alarm bells. Arrows rise into the sky. Dragon twists between them, furious, while Donkey clings to one of her horns and screams directions. Shrek leans forward, eyes locked on the cathedral. The distance feels impossible. The sun touches the horizon. Fiona is asked whether she accepts Farquaad as her husband. She hesitates. The entire cathedral waits. Farquaad's smile tightens. He whispers that she should answer quickly. Fiona looks at the window again. Light slips across the floor, retreating inch by inch. If she says no, she loses the protection of marriage. If she says yes, she may lose herself forever. Her lips part. I do. The words leave her mouth like surrender. Before the priest can finish, the cathedral doors explode inward. Shrek stands in the opening, breathing hard, clothes torn by the flight, Hundreds of faces turn toward him. Soldiers reach for their swords. Farquaad's expression twists from shock to disgust. Fiona looks at Shrek as though the world has suddenly begun moving again. Shrek walks down the aisle, ignoring every weapon pointed at his chest. He tells Fiona that Farquaad only wants to marry her so he can become king. Farquaad laughs and reminds everyone that Shrek is an ogre, a jealous beast who could never understand love. The crowd murmurs. Shrek's courage flickers under their stares, but he keeps moving. He tells Fiona the truth. He loves her. The cathedral falls silent. Fiona's eyes fill with tears. For one breath, everything she feared seems small. She admits that she loves him too. Farquaad's face hardens. He orders the guards to remove Shrek, but Fiona steps between them. She says there is something Shrek still does not know. Then the final ray of sunlight disappears. Her body begins to change. The white sleeves tighten around growing arms. Her fingers thicken. Green spreads across her skin. Gasps ripple through the cathedral as Princess Fiona becomes an ogress before the entire kingdom. The crowd recoils. Some people scream. Farquaad stares at her with horror, as though the woman beside him has transformed into a disease. Fiona's chest rises and falls. She looks only at Shrek. He is stunned, not disgusted, not afraid, just stunned. Farquaad's humiliation turns to rage. He shouts that the princess is hideous, that the wedding is over, and that he will still claim the throne by locking her away. Soldiers seize Fiona. More surround Shrek. Farquaad snatches the crown and places it on his own head, announcing himself king before anyone can challenge him. Shrek fights, but chains are thrown around his arms. He is forced to his knees. Fiona calls his name as guards drag her toward the doors. Donkey is nowhere in sight. Dragon is nowhere in sight. For the first time, Farquaad appears to have won. He leans close to Shrek and smiles. The monster will return to his swamp alone. The princess will vanish into another tower, and Duloc will remember only the perfect king who saved them from both. Then the cathedral windows begin to shake. A deep growl rolls through the stone. Farquaad's smile disappears. Something enormous is outside. The growl deepens until dust falls from the cathedral ceiling. Guards look toward the windows. Farquaad steps backward, gripping his crown with both hands. Then the roof erupts. Stone and colored glass rain across the aisle as Dragon smashes her enormous head into the cathedral. Soldiers scatter. Nobles dive beneath benches. Donkey sits proudly between her horns, shouting that nobody hurts his friends. Dragon's eyes lock on Farquaad. Smoke curls from her nostrils. The self-proclaimed king tries to hide behind his guards, but they abandon him before he can give another order. Shrek tears against the chains around his arms. One link snaps. Then another. He rises, throws the broken restraints aside, and charges toward Fiona. Two soldiers block him. He drives one into a pillar and swings the other across the floor. Fiona fights too. Twisting free from the men holding her and knocking them aside with strength she had spent years believing was shameful. Farquaad watches everything collapse around him. The perfect wedding, the obedient kingdom, the beautiful princess he planned to display beside his throne. His face burns with humiliation. He points at Fiona and screams that she is still his prisoner. He calls Shrek a filthy beast. Then he declares that creatures like them will never belong in his kingdom. Shrek stops. For years, those words would have driven him back into hiding. He would have growled, frightened everyone away, and pretended their disgust meant nothing. But Fiona stands beside him now, shaking beneath the stares of the crowd. Shrek reaches for her hand. He does not hide. Farquaad orders the soldiers to attack, but Dragon moves first. Her massive jaws close around him, lifting the tiny ruler from the ground. Farquaad screams, kicks, and clutches at the crown as Dragon swallows him in one gulp. The crown bounces once across the stone floor. Silence. Then Donkey leans down from Dragon's head and announces that Farquaad may have been short, but he was surprisingly filling. The terrified crowd remains frozen. Shrek stares at Donkey. Fiona stares at Dragon. And slowly, impossibly, they begin to laugh. The laughter breaks the fear inside the cathedral. A few guests smile, others flee. None of it matters anymore. Shrek turns toward Fiona. Around them, broken glass glows beneath the moonlight. The ruined wedding decorations sway in the smoky air. Fiona's white dress is torn, her hair has fallen loose, and her green face is wet with tears. She looks beautiful. Shrek steps closer. Fiona's smile trembles. She reminds him that the curse can only be broken by true love's first kiss. Yet fear returns to her eyes. The spell promised that love would reveal her true form. All her life, she believed that meant the thin, human princess from the daylight. What if the magic changes her back? What if Shrek sees that version of her and realizes the woman he loves belongs beside a king after all? Shrek gently touches her cheek. He tells her he has already seen her true form. It is the woman standing before him. They kiss. A golden light bursts around Fiona. Wind races through the cathedral, lifting ribbons, flowers, and shattered pieces of parchment into the air. Fiona rises from the ground as the magic circles her body. Her shape flashes between human and ogress. Princess, ogress, princess, ogress, while Shrek shields his eyes. Then the light explodes. Fiona falls. Shrek catches her before she hits the floor. For one breath, she does not move. Donkey slides from Dragon's head and rushes closer. The cathedral becomes silent again. Fiona opens her eyes. She looks down at herself. Green hands, broad arms, round ears. She is still an ogress. Confusion crosses her face. This cannot be right. The curse promised she would become love's true form. She whispers that she was supposed to be beautiful. Shrek looks at her as though the answer is obvious. She is. The fear inside Fiona finally breaks. She smiles, not like a princess performing for a kingdom, but like someone who no longer needs permission to exist. She pulls Shrek close, and they kiss again while Donkey cheers and Dragon roars above them. But the cathedral is still filled with people who once feared creatures like them. Shrek's swamp is still waiting. Fiona has lost the royal future she was raised to expect. Their enemy is gone, yet neither of them knows what happens after the fairy tale ends. Shrek looks at Fiona. Fiona squeezes his hand. Together, they walk through the ruined doors, toward a life no storybook had ever promised them. Morning settles over the swamp, soft and golden. For the first time, Shrek does not wake to silence. Music drifts between the trees. Fairy tale creatures hurry through the mud carrying flowers, ribbons, and crooked wooden chairs. The three little pigs argue over decorations. Pinocchio gets tangled in a string of lanterns. The blind mice stumble into the wedding cake. Shrek stands outside his home, dressed in formal clothes that do not quite fit, staring at the chaos he once fought so hard to remove. Strangely, he does not want them gone. Donkey races from one task to another, shouting instructions no one follows. Dragon watches from behind the trees, wearing an enormous smile and a collection of flowers around her horns. Every few seconds, Donkey glances up at her and forgets what he was saying. Shrek notices and shakes his head, but there is warmth in his eyes. The annoying little animal who followed him home has become his closest friend. The dragon who nearly burned them alive is now part of the family. Then Fiona appears. She walks through the swamp in a white wedding dress, redesigned for the woman she truly is. No spell hides her green skin. No dark room waits for sunset. She does not lower her face when everyone turns to look. Her shoulders are straight. Her smile is bright. She looks toward Shrek, and the noise around them fades. For years, Fiona imagined this moment inside a shining castle. A handsome prince. A golden crown. Crowds cheering for a perfect princess. None of that dream survived. The castle is gone. The prince never existed. The crown belonged to a cruel man who saw her as a doorway to power. Yet standing in the mud, surrounded by creatures the world rejected, Fiona feels more like herself than she ever did behind palace walls. Shrek takes her hands. His voice catches when he tries to speak, and Donkey loudly tells him not to cry. Shrek glares at him. Fiona laughs. That laughter steadies him. He promises nothing grand. No kingdom, no servants, no perfect ending. He offers her his home, his honesty, his stubborn heart, and every strange morning that comes after this one. Fiona accepts. They kiss as the swamp erupts in celebration. Birds scatter from the trees. Dragon breathes a burst of fire into the sky. Donkey sings so loudly that several guests cover their ears. Even the wolf, still wearing the grandmother's nightgown, begins to dance. The place Shrek once protected from everyone has become crowded, messy, and alive, and that is the real change. Shrek spent years believing loneliness was freedom. He built walls from anger and called them peace. Whenever someone came close, he frightened them away before they had the chance to reject him. Fiona built different walls. She hid behind manners, beauty, and the promise that one magical kiss would turn her into someone worthy of love. Both of them were waiting to become acceptable. Neither of them needed to. The celebration continues until the sky turns orange. Shrek glances at Fiona as the sun sinks behind the trees. Once, that fading light filled her with terror. Now she watches it calmly. Nothing changes. No secret shape appears. No frightened princess hides behind a locked door. Fiona remains exactly as she is, and Shrek remains beside her. Later, they climb into a carriage made from an enormous onion. The guests gather to wave goodbye. Donkey runs after them, still singing, while Dragon pulls him gently back with her tail. Shrek and Fiona lean from the carriage and laugh as the swamp disappears behind them. Inside, Fiona rests her head against Shrek's shoulder. Their future will not be perfect. People may still stare. Some will still call them monsters. They will argue, make mistakes, and face dangers no storybook could predict. But Shrek is no longer afraid of being seen. Fiona is no longer waiting to be changed. The carriage rolls beneath the evening sky, leaving two muddy tracks across the road. Shrek opens the old fairy tale book that once promised a beautiful princess and a handsome hero. He reads the final page, smiles, and closes it, because true love did break the curse. It simply revealed that the curse was never Fiona's face. It was the belief that she had to become someone else before she deserved to be loved. Shrek begins by tearing a page from a fairy tale book and using it as toilet paper. That single joke announces the entire creative philosophy. This movie knows the traditional rules: noble princes, helpless princesses, handsome heroes, and spotless kingdoms. It simply refuses to respect them. Directors Andrew Adamson and Vicky Jensen were not trying to destroy fairy tales. They wanted to expose how narrow those stories could be, then rebuild the genre around characters usually pushed into the background. Adamson described their goal as demystifying the stereotypes reinforced by fairy tales. The result was a children's adventure powered by the attitude of a rebellious adult comedy. The original spark came from William Steig's short 1990 picture book about an ugly, ill-tempered ogre. Producer John H. Williams discovered the book through his children and saw cinematic potential in a character who was rude, grotesque, and completely comfortable with himself. That mattered. Animated heroes were normally designed to invite affection immediately. Shrek does the opposite. He bathes in mud, eats disgusting food, and terrifies villagers for entertainment. The filmmakers understood that his unpleasant surface was not an obstacle to the story. It was the story. Here was a hero whose appearance allowed the movie to explore judgment, loneliness, and the exhausting performance of pretending not to care. Development stretched across years, with principal animation beginning at Pacific Data Images in October 1996. The movie that finally reached cinemas was far from the version that entered production. Characters changed, storylines shifted, and the tone repeatedly had to be recalibrated. Jensen later recalled seeing an early screening that felt divided between large-scale adventure and wildly anarchic comedy. She joined while the character designs and narrative were still unsettled, first working as a story artist before becoming co-director. That instability could have produced a mess. Instead, it gave the team permission to keep searching until the movie discovered its identity. Animation moves slowly, but that slowness created room for reinvention. Adamson brought an unusual perspective to the director's chair. Before Shrek, he had worked extensively in computer-generated visual effects, including supervisory roles on films such as Batman Forever and Batman and Robin. Jensen came from the opposite side of the craft, rising through background painting, design, and storyboarding on productions that included The Ren and Stimpy Show. One understood the developing language of digital imagery. The other had spent years thinking through drawings, comic staging, and character behavior. Their partnership connected technology with personality. Shrek could push computer animation forward without becoming a sterile demonstration of software, because every technical decision remained tied to a joke, an emotion, or a character beat. They divided the film by sequences rather than assigning one director to story and the other to animation. Each became responsible for complete portions of the movie, working with animators, editors, and production designers, then showing the results to the other at the end of the day. That structure created clarity without sacrificing collaboration. The crew knew who could answer detailed questions while both directors retained influence over the whole film. You can feel that balance on screen. The gingerbread man interrogation has the timing of a comedy sketch. The collapsing bridge sequence plays like physical suspense. Shrek's quiet confession to Donkey slows everything down and allows an emotional wound to surface. Different modes. One coherent voice. That coherence depended on finding the correct tonal mixture. Shrek mocks storybook sentimentality, yet it never mocks the need for love. The crude jokes pull audiences in, but sincerity gives those jokes weight. Jensen explained that the team kept the irreverence while allowing genuine emotion to break through Shrek's defenses. That is the creative trick imitators often missed. Sarcasm alone would have made the film exhausting. Sentiment without sarcasm would have turned it into the kind of polished fairy tale it was parodying. The directors placed both impulses in constant conflict. Every time the movie approaches sweetness, someone punctures it. Every time cynicism threatens to dominate, Shrek's loneliness quietly returns. The production's physical separation from DreamWorks' main operation strengthened its outsider personality. Much of the work happened at PDI in Palo Alto, where Jensen remembered the team feeling almost like a small company making a strange film for its own amusement. Adamson described the project as a destination for artists who had not fitted comfortably elsewhere. That could sound like studio exile. Creatively, it became liberation. The movie was made by people who understood the experience of being underestimated, and they poured that feeling into an ogre who wants the world to leave him alone, because rejection hurts less when you reject everyone first. That is why the film's rebellion still has emotional force. Adamson and Jensen did more than replace a prince with an ogre. They questioned who audiences had been trained to recognize as heroic, beautiful, or worthy of a happy ending. DreamWorks officially marketed it as the greatest fairy tale never told, but the directors gave that slogan substance. An outsider's story told by a team embracing its own outsider status. The vision was bold, messy, and unusually personal for a studio comedy. But vision alone cannot sustain 90 minutes. Its next challenge was turning Steig's tiny book into a complete screenplay without losing the sharp, ugly little soul that made Shrek worth adapting. Transforming William Steig's brief picture book into a 90-minute feature required more than adding characters and stretching the journey. The writers needed to preserve its central joke, an ogre becoming the hero, while creating enough emotional conflict to support an entire film. Ted Elliott, Terry Rossio, Joe Stillman, and Roger S.H. Schulman share the finished screenplay credit, although the story continued evolving through DreamWorks' collaborative animation process. What emerged was not a faithful page-by-page adaptation. It was an expansion built around the same provocative question. What happens when the person who looks like the monster is actually the one most capable of love? Steig's book gave the filmmakers a wonderfully rude foundation. Its Shrek is ugly, confident, and delighted by the terror he inspires. The movie keeps the mud baths, revolting appetite, and complete rejection of polite society, but gives that behavior a psychological cause. Film Shrek insists he prefers isolation because isolation protects him. He cannot be rejected when nobody is allowed close enough to judge him. That alteration is the screenplay's most important invention. The book's ogre is comfortable in his skin from the beginning. The movie's ogre has built an entire identity around pretending that other people's cruelty does not hurt. Elliott and Rossio reportedly approached the central characters through different responses to damaged self-esteem. Shrek withdraws. Donkey talks endlessly, demanding connection before anyone can abandon him. Fiona performs the role of the perfect princess because she believes love depends upon hiding her true body. Farquaad compensates for insecurity through control, status, and theatrical displays of authority. Different personalities, same wound. That shared emotional architecture keeps the movie unified even when its jokes move from medieval fantasy to wrestling commentary and theme park satire. Beneath every comic detour sits the fear that being seen clearly will make a person impossible to love. The plot itself uses an almost aggressively traditional fairy tale structure. A ruler gives a hero a mission. The hero travels with a companion, reaches a dragon's castle, rescues a princess, and returns to claim his reward. Clean, familiar, deliberate. The writers needed audiences to recognize the machinery before they could enjoy watching it malfunction. Shrek does not want glory. He wants legal ownership of his swamp restored. Donkey is not a loyal steed, but an exhausting conversational ambush. Fiona is not waiting passively for salvation. She is irritated that her rescue lacks proper romance. Every expected story beat arrives wearing the wrong expression. Lord Farquaad gives that structure its satirical target. Duloc is spotless, symmetrical, and emotionally dead, a kingdom where fairy tale creatures are removed because they disrupt the approved image. The information booth sings rules. The guards move crowds through roped pathways. Even the tournament becomes staged entertainment for a ruler watching from above. The screenplay turns perfection into something vaguely sinister. Shrek's swamp may be filthy, but it is alive and personal. Duloc shines because everything complicated has been expelled. The contrast turns production comedy into an argument. A world obsessed with flawless appearances eventually begins treating individuality as contamination. Then there is Donkey, the screenplay's pressure release valve, an accidental therapist. His dialogue does more than fill silence. He refuses to accept Shrek's performance of indifference. Every question, complaint, and uninvited observation pushes against the ogre's emotional barricade. Their conversations also prevent the film's irony from becoming cold. Donkey believes in friendship almost immediately, even when Shrek gives him no encouragement. That persistence would be irritating in a weaker script. Here, it becomes the force Shrek secretly needs. The loudest character in the film is the one who hears what nobody else notices. Fiona complicates the story further because she initially seems to represent everything the movie mocks. She expects poetic rescue, heroic declarations, and a handsome prince. Yet her exaggerated princess behavior is another disguise. The screenplay gradually loosens it through small disruptions. She sings so forcefully that a bird explodes, fights like an action hero, and shares Shrek's enthusiasm for disgusting food. Comedy becomes revelation. Each joke removes another layer of performance until the supposed princess and supposed monster begin behaving like equals. Their romance works because attraction grows through recognition, not destiny. They fall for the selves they were trained to conceal. That idea gives the true love's form conclusion its power. Traditional fairy tales usually treat transformation as a reward. Ugliness disappears. Beauty arrives, and goodness becomes visible through physical perfection. Shrek reverses the equation. Fiona's permanent ogre form does not expose a tragic curse. It exposes the lie behind her expectations. She expected love to make her conventionally beautiful because every story had taught her that beauty was the proof of a happy ending. Instead, love allows her to stop auditioning for acceptance. The screenplay does not merely parody the old formula. It replaces it with something kinder. The writing succeeds because every major comic choice eventually returns to character. Fairy tale references create recognition. Pop culture jokes create speed. Adult innuendo gives the film its mischievous edge. But Shrek's guarded pauses, Fiona's panic, and Donkey's desperate friendliness give the comedy a heartbeat. A clever concept had become a durable story, and the screenplay had created roles demanding very specific vocal personalities. The next gamble was finding performers who could make an ogre, a donkey, a princess, and a miniature tyrant feel less like animated inventions than people we had somehow known for years. The voice most closely associated with Shrek was not the voice DreamWorks originally hired. Chris Farley had been cast as the ogre and completed a substantial amount of recording before his death in December 1997. Surviving material indicates a younger, more openly vulnerable interpretation, an outsider still wrestling with his place in the world. Replacing Farley, therefore, meant more than asking another comedian to repeat finished dialogue. The filmmakers had lost the personality around which the character was being constructed. Shrek needed a new vocal identity, and the production needed someone capable of making cruelty, defensiveness, and loneliness coexist inside the same enormous green body. Mike Myers inherited an unusually difficult assignment. He was following a former Saturday Night Live colleague, entering a film that had already passed through years of development, and voicing a character whose visual design still carried traces of Farley's broad physical presence. Myers later recalled recognizing that resemblance in the Shrek maquette and suspecting that the role had originally belonged to Farley. That history could have encouraged imitation. Instead, Myers rebuilt the ogre around his own strengths: tightly controlled irritation, character-based accents, and the ability to hide tenderness underneath comic hostility. DreamWorks did not merely replace one famous comedian with another. It allowed the role to mutate around its replacement. Even that replacement was not settled immediately. Myers first recorded Shrek using a heavier version of his Canadian voice and leaned toward making him intimidating. After watching a rough cut in February 2000, he decided the performance lacked the vulnerability the character required. He asked to record the dialogue again. Despite the fact that animation had already been completed for a significant portion of Shrek's scenes, Myers shifted to a Scottish accent inspired partly by the voices of his childhood, while DreamWorks absorbed the expensive consequences of reworking animation around new vocal rhythms. Jeffrey Katzenberg later said the difference justified the disruption. The Scottish voice changed more than pronunciation. It gave Shrek a working-class bluntness that clashes beautifully with the polished storybook world surrounding him. Myers does not make him sound mythic or monstrous. He sounds like a tired man who has been interrupted during dinner. That was the correct casting instinct. Shrek's comedy depends on treating fantasy absurdities as everyday annoyances, and Myers had already built a career around characters with highly specific voices and private logic, from Wayne Campbell to Austin Powers. Here, however, the vocal disguise protects something quieter. The accent becomes armor, but it is flexible enough to crack whenever Shrek's hurt rises to the surface. Eddie Murphy was the cast's most immediately natural fit. By 2001, audiences already knew his rapid delivery, elastic pitch, and talent for turning panic into escalating comedy. He had also voiced Mushu in Disney's Mulan, proving that his personality could survive the transition into animation. Donkey offered an even cleaner vehicle for that energy because the character almost never stopped speaking. Yet Murphy was not cast merely to produce noise. His warmth prevents Donkey from becoming an exhausting joke machine. At the 2001 Cannes screening, contemporary coverage singled out Murphy's scenes as audience favorites, evidence that his comic timing worked even before the film became a cultural phenomenon. Casting Cameron Diaz as Fiona brought a different kind of expectation. Diaz had become a major star through The Mask, My Best Friend's Wedding, There's Something About Mary, and Charlie's Angels. Audiences associated her with glamour, romantic comedy, and an increasingly confident physical comic style. That image was useful because Fiona initially appears to be a conventional celebrity princess. Graceful voice, perfect manners, rehearsed ideas about rescue. Diaz could sell that surface without making Fiona lifeless. More importantly, her comic background allowed the character to abandon elegance without losing charm. The casting turns Fiona's polished femininity into a costume she can gradually discard. John Lithgow completed the central quartet by giving Lord Farquaad the grandest voice in the smallest body. The joke works before he finishes a sentence. Lithgow possessed decades of classical theater experience, 2 Academy Award nominations, and by then a hugely successful comic television role in Third Rock from the Sun. He could sound educated, commanding, and ridiculous without separating those qualities. Farquaad never appears to realize that he is funny, which makes him funnier. Lithgow later admitted that he initially regarded the production as something closer to an insignificant Saturday morning cartoon and recorded for it intermittently over several years. His lack of expectation somehow suits the performance. He plays the tyrant with total seriousness. The smaller roles reveal another smart casting philosophy. Rather than filling every fairy tale creature with recognizable celebrities, the production used artists already working inside animation. Story artist Conrad Vernon voiced the Gingerbread Man. Chris Miller handled the Magic Mirror and Geppetto. Cody Cameron voiced Pinocchio and the 3 Little Pigs. These performers understood timing at the storyboard level. They knew where a pause could sharpen a gag and how an exaggerated voice might inspire an animator's expression. Their presence also stops the film from feeling like a parade of expensive cameos. The stars anchor the story. The crew voices make the world feel unruly, crowded, and handmade. There was no obvious reason these voices should blend. Myers is dry and guarded. Murphy attacks silence. Diaz shifts between storybook control and comic abandon. Lithgow delivers every absurdity as royal decree. That contrast became the casting strategy. Each actor occupies a different rhythm, allowing the characters to collide before they connect. More importantly, their voices clarify personality even when the animation is motionless. Close your eyes and the relationships remain intact. But inspired casting only opens the door. What made these choices permanent was performance. The breaths, hesitations, eruptions, and tiny vocal fractures that transformed famous actors into characters capable of outliving them. Mike Myers' finest moment as Shrek contains almost no comedy. Sitting beneath the stars, he tries to explain ogres through the now famous onion metaphor. At first, the delivery is impatient and defensive. Ogres have layers. End of discussion. Then Donkey misinterprets him, and the irritation becomes a shield. Myers keeps Shrek's voice rough, but the aggression gradually loses force. By the time he admits that people judge him before knowing him, the accent seems to shrink around the confession. He never begs for sympathy. He sounds embarrassed that the truth escaped at all. That restraint turns a cartoon monster into someone painfully recognizable. The Scottish accent is essential to that effect. Myers initially recorded Shrek differently, then pushed to redo the performance after deciding the character needed another vocal identity. The change required substantial production adjustments, but it gave Shrek a sharper social contrast with the polished language of castles, princesses, and royal ceremony. His voice feels grounded, blunt, and suspicious of elegance. Every rolled consonant seems to reject the world that rejected him first. Yet Myers avoids making the accent a single extended joke. It carries anger when Shrek threatens villagers, warmth when he relaxes around Fiona, and genuine panic when emotional exposure becomes unavoidable. Watch how often Myers lets Shrek retreat after revealing something personal. He speaks, realizes he has said too much, then covers the wound with sarcasm. During the journey, his insults toward Donkey are rarely delivered with true hatred. The volume says, "Leave," but the rhythm leaves room for Donkey to answer. That contradiction is the performance. Shrek has spent years constructing solitude as a preference, yet Myers allows companionship to improve his mood before the character consciously accepts it. His laughter becomes easier. His sentences become less guarded. Even his complaints begin sounding affectionate. The emotional arc happens inside the voice, long before Shrek is prepared to name it. Eddie Murphy operates at the opposite speed. Donkey does not hide emotions. He broadcasts every one of them at maximum volume. Fear becomes a scream, excitement becomes a song, and mild curiosity becomes an interrogation without an exit. Murphy could have overwhelmed the film. Instead, he gives the noise structure. Listen to the bridge sequence. Donkey's panic rises through distinct stages, from nervous resistance to bargaining to complete physical collapse. Each escalation arrives at exactly the right moment. The words are funny, but the breath control sells them. Murphy makes Donkey sound as though his thoughts are escaping faster than he can organize them. That precision earned unusual recognition for an animated performance. Murphy received a BAFTA nomination in the supporting actor category, competing directly with live-action performances rather than being isolated in a voice acting award. The nomination makes sense because Donkey is not merely a celebrity voice attached to an animated animal. Murphy builds a complete emotional instrument. He can stretch a single word into a protest, snap through dialogue like a drummer accelerating the tempo, then suddenly soften when Donkey realizes Shrek is genuinely hurting. Those quieter turns matter. Without them, Donkey would entertain Shrek without ever becoming his friend. Murphy's greatest contribution may be his refusal to make Donkey ashamed of needing affection. Shrek treats loneliness as strength. Donkey treats it as an emergency. When he follows Shrek into the swamp, occupies his home, and inserts himself into the quest, the behavior is absurdly intrusive. Murphy makes it feel innocent because Donkey never seems calculating. He wants connection with the uncomplicated urgency of someone who has been unwanted before. Even his jokes carry that need. He talks because silence might mean abandonment. Suddenly, the chatter has a sad little engine underneath it, and Murphy lets us hear that engine without slowing the comedy down to explain it. Cameron Diaz faces a subtler challenge because Fiona begins as a performance within a performance. Her first lines are shaped by fairy tale expectation, formal vocabulary, romantic certainty, and the breathless excitement of someone who has rehearsed this rescue for years. Diaz plays those early moments almost too perfectly. Fiona is not simply elegant. She is imitating what she thinks elegance should sound like. Then she realizes her rescuer is an ogre who has no interest in the script. Her delivery hardens. The princess voice starts slipping, and a more impatient, competitive, and wonderfully strange personality pushes through. The transformation is clearest during Fiona's comic eruptions. Her confrontation with Robin Hood's band could have felt like a random action parody, but Diaz gives the scene a sense of release. Fiona is finally using abilities that do not fit the identity imposed upon her. Her grunts, sharp commands, and satisfied reactions carry more freedom than her earlier romantic speeches. The same thing happens during the gross-out courtship with Shrek. Diaz does not play Fiona as a refined woman temporarily acting crude. She plays her as someone discovering how relaxing it feels to stop monitoring herself. The laughter becomes fuller because the character is no longer performing for an imaginary audience. Diaz also understands that Fiona's secret creates fear, not merely embarrassment. As sunset approaches, her sentences tighten and her attention fractures. She can be joking with Shrek one moment, then abruptly remember the deadline controlling her body. The shift is small but immediate. When Fiona later speaks about ugliness, Diaz lowers the brightness in her voice without turning the scene into melodrama. Fiona has internalized the fairy tale's judgment so deeply that she repeats it against herself. Myers responds with guarded tenderness, and the two performances briefly mirror each other. Both characters are talking about appearance, while desperately asking whether they are lovable. Their chemistry works because Myers and Diaz resist instant romance. Early exchanges contain irritation, suspicion, and competitive humor. Affection grows in the pauses after jokes when neither character knows what to say next. Murphy then disrupts those pauses, turning Donkey into both comic obstacle and emotional witness. The trio creates a rhythm the animation can build around. Myers compresses, Murphy explodes, Diaz shifts between control and release. Producer Aaron Warner thanked all four principal actors when Shrek won the inaugural Academy Award for Animated Feature, and the recognition belonged to more than famous names on a poster. These voices gave the film its nervous system. That nervous system allows the story's sentiment to land without becoming sugary. Myers makes vulnerability feel dangerous. Murphy makes friendship feel relentless. Diaz makes self-acceptance feel like the abandonment of a role she never chose. None of them can rely on facial expressions, costumes, or physical presence in the usual sense, yet their breathing, timing, and tonal changes give the animators emotional material to amplify. Still, three strong leads cannot populate an entire fairy tale kingdom. The film's world becomes truly alive through the performers surrounding them, especially a tyrant played with Shakespearean seriousness, a tortured cookie, and a dragon whose most important relationship contains no spoken dialogue at all. Lord Farquaad's funniest scene may be his first serious one. He tortures a gingerbread man on a baking tray, demands information about fugitive fairy tale creatures, and threatens to tear off his gumdrop buttons. The situation is ridiculous. John Lithgow refuses to acknowledge that. He gives every command the weight of royal law, allowing Farquaad's self-importance to collide with the childish world around him. That absolute seriousness is the performance's engine. Had Lithgow played the ruler as openly silly, the character would have become harmless. Instead, Farquaad remains funny because he believes completely in his authority, and dangerous because everyone else is forced to participate in that belief. Lithgow's theatrical control gives Farquaad a scale his body deliberately lacks. The actor had already moved between Broadway prestige drama, movie villains, and television comedy before voicing the role, and that range is compressed into every line. He elongates formal phrases, attacks insults with precise diction, and speaks as though the walls of Duloc should applaud him. Farquaad does not shout constantly because he assumes obedience. Even his marriage proposal is treated like an administrative transaction. Lithgow later recalled that children recognized him only after he repeated the character's lines, a perfect reflection of how fully the voice disappears into the animated tyrant. His best partner is not another actor but the magic mirror. Voiced by Chris Miller, the mirror behaves less like an ancient mystical object and more like the host of a television dating show. The performance converts exposition into entertainment. 3 princesses become contestants, magical information becomes a sales pitch, and Farquaad's political marriage becomes an audience participation spectacle. Miller had worked in animation and story development at DreamWorks, later voicing both the mirror and Geppetto. That background shows in his timing. He understands exactly how much vocal enthusiasm the animators can exaggerate before a joke collapses under its own energy. Conrad Vernon performs a similar miracle with the Gingerbread Man. Gingy has only a small amount of screen time, yet his interrogation became one of the movie's defining sequences. Vernon gives him a tiny, delicate voice without making him weak. The character bargains, lies, screams, and finally spits defiance at Farquaad, all while missing his legs. Eat Me lands because Gingy suddenly sounds less like a frightened biscuit and more like a prisoner refusing to break. Vernon entered the film as a storyboard artist and writer, with Shrek becoming his first credited voice acting role. The scene feels storyboarded from inside the performance. Every squeak seems designed around a facial twitch or violent little gesture. Cody Cameron provides Pinocchio and 2 of the 3 little pigs, turning familiar figures into workers inside a crowded comic ecosystem. His Pinocchio voice strains toward innocence even when the character is obviously attempting deception. The joke is not merely that his nose exposes lies. It is that his delivery exposes them first. Cameron's pigs speak in thick German accents, a choice broad enough to be immediately readable but controlled enough to remain consistent across brief appearances. Like Vernon and Miller, Cameron also worked on the film's story and dialogue. The supporting voices were therefore not detached celebrity cameos. They came from artists already helping to shape the movie's comic language. Vincent Cassel's Monsieur Hood arrives with more confidence than screen time. He swings into the forest assuming that Fiona requires rescue from Shrek, then launches into a musical explanation of his own heroism. Cassell voices him with polished romantic arrogance, which makes Fiona's sudden physical destruction of his entire group even more satisfying. Before Shrek, Cassell was already celebrated for intense work in French cinema, including La Haine. Casting that kind of dramatic presence for a character who is kicked unconscious within minutes sharpens the parody. Monsieur Hood sounds like the leading man of another film. Right until Fiona reminds him whose story this actually is. Dragon contributes something different because she communicates without spoken dialogue. Her performance belongs to animation, sound, and the reactions of everyone around her. At first, she is framed as a conventional obstacle. Enormous, violent, and positioned between the hero and the princess. Donkey changes the scene by attempting flirtation instead of combat. The animators respond by shifting Dragon's eyes, posture, and breathing from predatory aggression to romantic curiosity. Suddenly, the monster becomes another character trapped by appearances. Her attraction to Donkey is played as a joke, but the relationship quietly repeats the film's central idea. Affection becomes possible when someone stops responding to the role a body appears to demand. The ensemble's real strength lies in compression. Minor characters do not require lengthy introductions because each arrives with a complete attitude. The 3 little pigs are displaced immigrants. Pinocchio is a terrible liar. The big bad wolf is strangely comfortable in grandmother's clothing. The magic mirror has become a broadcaster, while Robin Hood behaves like the hero of a musical nobody requested. Producer Aaron Warner described the filmmaker's approach as taking familiar fairy tale figures and turning them sideways because audiences already carried these characters in their cultural memory. Recognition does half the work. Performance supplies the disruption. That economy prevents Shrek, Fiona, and Donkey from floating through an empty digital landscape. Everywhere they travel, another personality interrupts them. Some voices come from established stars, others from artists inside the production, yet the distinction disappears on screen. Together, they create a kingdom that feels crowded, petty, theatrical, and alive. But voices alone cannot build that world. The jokes need castles, forests, torture chambers, swamps, and an obsessively perfect kingdom capable of expressing character before anyone speaks. And that physical imagination is where Shrek's visual design begins doing some of its smartest storytelling. Shrek's swamp is introduced as a punchline, but look past the mud shower and slug toothpaste. The place is not a punishment, it is a home. Its crooked furniture, improvised plumbing, and hollowed-out tree trunk feel assembled by someone who values usefulness over presentation. Nothing matches, yet everything belongs. That distinction matters because the film refuses to treat ugliness as the absence of design. The swamp has more personality than any polished castle in the story. It reflects Shrek before he speaks. Rough, defensive, self-sufficient, and far more comfortable than outsiders assume. The world calls it disgusting. Shrek sees privacy, freedom, and ownership. Production designer James Hegedus described the swamp as an organic hovel constructed from materials Shrek could have found around him. Art director Douglas Rogers traveled to a magnolia plantation near Charleston, South Carolina, to study a genuine wetland environment, and reportedly found himself chased by an alligator during the visit. Rogers and fellow art director Guillaume Aretos also researched locations including Hearst Castle, Stratford-upon-Avon, and France's Dordogne region while building the film's broader storybook vocabulary. The research prevented the fantasy world from becoming generic. Its environments may be exaggerated, but they begin with recognizable textures, architecture, and geography. The swamp's design favors curves, earth colors, and clutter. Roots twist around the house. Vegetation intrudes into every corner. Mud does not simply cover the ground. It appears to have shaped the place over time. Even Shrek's possessions carry evidence of use. His dining table looks heavy enough to survive his appetite, while candles and handmade utensils create unexpected warmth inside the tree. Here's what makes the design work. It never asks audiences to admire the swamp from a distance. It makes the space feel inhabitable. Dirty, yes. Unlovable? Not remotely. The environment quietly challenges the same prejudice directed toward its owner. Duloc answers that warmth with straight lines. The streets are spotless, the lawns are controlled, and the buildings repeat the same hard geometry. Aretos described it as the creation of a ruler obsessed with order, while Hegedus emphasized its cool colors, minimal surfaces, and angular construction. The contrast with Shrek's home could not be sharper. The swamp grows. Duloc has been arranged. Flowers are replaced before they can wilt. Citizens stand behind barriers. Information arrives through a mechanical song that tells visitors where to walk and how to behave. The kingdom resembles a medieval amusement park because spontaneity would threaten its ruler's fantasy of perfection. Farquaad's enormous tower makes the joke architectural. He is physically tiny, yet his kingdom is dominated by a gigantic rectangular monument rising from a flat landscape. The building compensates for him before Lithgow delivers a line. Its height does not communicate spiritual greatness. It advertises insecurity. Doors, staircases, and ceremonial spaces make everyone else feel small because Farquaad needs the environment to perform authority on his behalf. Even his bedroom stretches upward with absurd grandeur. Duloc is therefore not merely a Disney parody or visual gag. It is an ego translated into stone, clean enough to hide cruelty, tall enough to disguise the frightened man at its center. The dragons keep pushes the design toward Gothic nightmare. The castle rises from a rock island that appears too small to support it, surrounded by darkness, jagged stone, and a moat of molten lava. The production team deliberately shaped it as a formidable silhouette, almost like a mountain forcing itself out of the landscape. Its rope bridge is fragile, its corridors cavernous, and its stairways seem designed to separate rescuers from one another. Unlike Duloc, this location is chaotic rather than controlled. But both environments rely on intimidation. One threatens through oppressive order. The other threatens through scale, heat, and instability. Fiona visually occupies the space between those worlds. Her tower costume initially fulfills the expected princess image: a long medieval gown, fitted bodice, and carefully arranged braid. Everything about her presentation implies discipline. Yet the design allows enough weight and flexibility for her to run, fight, cook, and travel without suddenly looking like a different character. Her clothing becomes dirtier as the journey continues, softening the distance between royal appearance and physical experience. The film's costume simulation allowed fabric to wrinkle and react to bodily movement, while Fiona's braid was animated to swing, strike her body, and bounce naturally. Even digital cloth becomes part of her gradual liberation. The fairy tale creatures follow a related philosophy: preserve the identifying feature, then twist the surrounding context. Pinocchio still has his nose. The three little pigs remain inseparable. The big bad wolf wears grandmother's clothing. Gingy is built from icing and gumdrops, but the interrogation chamber surrounds him with baking equipment repurposed as instruments of torture. The magic mirror retains his ornate frame while behaving like a television screen. These props turn cultural memory into comic shorthand. Audiences know what each object is supposed to mean, so the film can create humor by changing how it is used. Familiarity supplies the setup. Design delivers the punchline. The scale of the world was unusually ambitious for computer animation at the time. The film contained 36 separate locations, while its digital forest reportedly included more than 28,000 trees carrying roughly 3 billion leaves. The crew developed environments in which foliage, dirt, and atmospheric elements could respond to wind and character movement rather than sitting motionless behind the action. Yet the achievement is not the raw number of leaves. It is the difference they create between spaces. The forest feels loose and breathable. Duloc feels sealed. The keep feels hostile. Technology becomes valuable only when it gives each location a distinct emotional climate. That is the quiet success of Shrek's visual craftsmanship. The film talks constantly about judging surfaces, then builds environments whose surfaces tell complicated truths. The filthy swamp offers safety. The immaculate kingdom conceals intolerance. The terrifying castle contains a lonely dragon. Fiona's formal costume hides someone who wants to kick, laugh, and eat without embarrassment. Nothing is only what it appears to be. But production design creates the spaces. The camera decides how we experience them. And Shrek's virtual cinematography, its framing, lighting, movement, and digital staging, turns those constructed worlds into something that feels like cinema rather than an illustrated backdrop. The bridge to Dragon's Castle is where Shrek's virtual cinematography proves its value. The camera begins wide, emphasizing the enormous drop beneath a structure that looks incapable of supporting anyone. As Donkey panics, the framing tightens. Wide fantasy spectacle becomes intimate comic terror. Shrek then shakes the bridge, sending the horizon and ropes lurching around Donkey's body. No physical camera captured this sequence, of course, but the visual grammar is unmistakably cinematic. Establish the danger, compress the space, then use movement to trap us inside the frightened character's perspective. The technology disappears because every angle serves the joke. Computer animation gives filmmakers impossible freedom. A virtual camera can pass through walls, float above landscapes, or occupy positions no human operator could reach. But unrestricted movement often makes animated films feel weightless. Shrek usually resists that temptation. Its camera behaves as though it exists inside a physical world, observing characters from plausible heights and distances. The directors reserve dramatic movement for moments that need energy. The tournament battle, Dragon's pursuit, or Fiona's confrontation with Robin Hood. During emotional exchanges, the frame settles. That restraint gives Shrek's confession beneath the stars more force than another elaborate visual flourish could have provided. The facial work demanded an entirely different kind of technical control. PDI DreamWorks expanded the proprietary system previously used on ants, building digital characters from simulated skulls and facial muscles before layering skin over them. Hundreds of controls allowed animators to combine expressions rather than merely matching mouths to recorded speech. Supervising animator Ramon Hui identified Shrek's concealed emotions as the hardest material. The character frequently says one thing while his face needs to communicate another. That is exactly where the system earns its complexity. A lowered eyelid or tightened cheek can contradict the dialogue before Shrek's voice admits what he feels. Shrek's face is deliberately asymmetrical and imperfect. His cheeks compress, his double chin forms when his jaw moves, and his brow can shift from aggression to wounded hesitation without changing the basic design. The animators applied the same anatomical layering principle to whole bodies through a program called the Shaper, allowing inner movement to deform skin and clothing outward. It sounds technical because it was. On screen, the result is wonderfully ordinary. Shrek's stomach settles when he sits, cloth bunches around bent joints, and bodies retain weight instead of moving like polished plastic figures. The illusion works through accumulated imperfections. Fiona presented the opposite problem. The artists pushed her human appearance so far toward realism that she reportedly began to look out of place beside the stylized characters, forcing them to reduce the effect. Her skin required specialized shaders, digital instructions controlling how a surface responds to light, to imitate translucency without making her resemble a wax figure. A Hollywood makeup artist even advised the surfacing and lighting teams that retreat from complete realism was a crucial artistic decision. Technical accuracy is not the same as visual truth. Fiona only needed to feel human within Shrek's world, not appear ready to walk out of it. The character lighting follows that balance. Duloc receives clean illumination that flatters its geometric order while making the environment feel strangely artificial. The swamp is warmer and more uneven, filled with pockets of shadow, reflected green and amber firelight. Dragons Keep uses deeper contrast, with characters frequently outlined against lava or swallowed by dark stone corridors. None of these choices is accidental decoration. Light tells us how each space behaves. Duloc exposes and regulates. The swamp shelters. The castle threatens to erase anyone moving through it. The film may parody fairy tale imagery, but it understands why that imagery works before twisting it. Eyes carry much of the emotional burden. The production developed a separate rendering approach for them, individually animating irises in response to light and using virtual highlights to create the small gleam that makes a gaze feel alive. That detail is especially important for Shrek because his strongest reactions are often withheld. He can turn his body away while his eyes remain fixed on Fiona. Donkey's eyes operate differently, widening and darting with every new panic. Farquaad stay controlled, reinforcing his certainty. The same technology produces 4 distinct acting styles because the animators treat movement as character rather than mechanical realism. Then come the elements computers traditionally struggled to make convincing: hair, fur, fabric, fire, and liquid. Donkey's coat required directional control so individual strands would lie, overlap, and react to environmental movement rather than sticking straight outward. Fiona's braid inherited motion from her head, colliding with her body and bouncing as she moved. PDI's fluid animation system created substances with different thicknesses, including water, mud, beer, lava, and milk, while Dragon's Fire relied on volumetric rendering built from layered digital volumes. These systems gave each material its own behavior. Mud slumps, lava glows and churns, fire rolls forward like an attacking body. The fire effects became a production obsession. Visual effects supervisor Ken Beilenberg's team studied real flames, including footage from the Sydney Olympics, and even experimented with fire in the studio parking lot. Individual frames could require as much as 30 hours on one of the production's 2400 processors. Yet the most impressive detail is not computational expense. It is how Dragon's breath changes the rhythm of a scene. The flame does not appear as a decorative overlay. It expands through the frame, blocks escape routes, and forces characters into abrupt movement. Digital effects become staging partners rather than visual accessories. For all its advances, Shrek never looks obsessed with displaying them. Andrew Adamson said, "The effects were meant to enrich the world and strengthen its illusion of life, and that philosophy keeps the film focused. The camera moves when movement sharpens comedy. Lighting separates emotional spaces. Facial controls expose feelings the dialogue hides. Fire, fabric, and mud obey enough physical rules to make absurdity believable. The images establish the world's body, but its music and sound provide the pulse, turning silent glances, collapsing bridges, and charging dragons into sensations we feel before we have time to analyze them." The first sound after Shrek dismisses the fairy tale book is the opening guitar of All Star. No orchestral swell. No choir announcing destiny. Smash Mouth crashes into the film while Shrek showers in mud, brushes his teeth with insect slime, and frightens an angry mob. The song does not simply make the montage energetic. It introduces a hero who refuses to participate in the genre surrounding him. Its confidence is slightly ridiculous, its optimism almost aggressive. Perfect. Before the screenplay explains Shrek's personality, the soundtrack tells us that he sees himself as the star of a life nobody else would consider heroic. All Star began as a temporary track rather than the intended final choice. Music supervisor Mary Lotta Elton searched through hundreds of possible replacements, while the band self-created Stay Home after receiving access to the sequence. Test audiences still responded more strongly to Smash Mouth, and the production ultimately retained the existing song. That decision became inseparable from the film's identity. The track had already been a hit before Shrek, but the opening montage gave it a new narrative, meaning the song's celebration of unconventional winners becomes funny, defiant, and unexpectedly sincere when attached to a swamp-dwelling ogre. The orchestral score by Harry Gregson Williams and John Powell performs a different job. Recorded at Abbey Road Studios, it provides the emotional foundation underneath the pop soundtrack's irreverence. The composers treat the fairy tale world seriously enough for its subversion to matter. Their central fairy tale theme begins with the graceful motion and storybook color audiences expect, then reappears in altered forms across different situations. Gregson Williams later explained that the melody's transformation depended heavily on timing, instrumentation, and countermelody. A lilting waltz could become a driving four-beat rock idea without losing its identity. The theme changes because the story's definition of a fairy tale keeps changing. That flexibility allows the score to move between parody and emotional truth without drawing a border between them. Farquaad receives music with ceremonial weight, but its exaggerated precision makes his authority feel manufactured. Dragon's Castle gets larger orchestral gestures, rapid movement, and threatening low textures, giving the rescue genuine momentum even while Donkey is flirting with his captor. Then the arrangement thins beneath the stars, where Shrek's onion speech needs vulnerability rather than spectacle. The orchestra does not instruct us to pity him. It creates space around his voice. Strings and softer instrumental colors let the silence between sentences become part of the confession. Silence matters throughout the film because its central characters use speech so differently. Donkey treats an empty second as something that must be filled immediately. Shrek uses pauses to regain control. Fiona's silences grow tense whenever sunset approaches. The soundscape respects those contrasts. When Donkey talks, verbal rhythm often becomes percussion. Words tumble over footsteps, reactions, and environmental noises. When Shrek withdraws, the film allows quieter details to surface. The crackle of a fire, nighttime insects, or the open air surrounding the characters. The absence of noise is never truly empty. It places us inside the discomfort Shrek is trying to conceal. The film's original comic songs behave almost like miniature stage productions. Welcome to Duloc, written by Mike Himmelstein and Eric Darnell, delivers rules through smiling mechanical figures whose cheerful voices make the kingdom feel more disturbing, not less. The tune is bright, repetitive, and impossible to misunderstand, the musical equivalent of compulsory happiness. Merry Men, performed during Monsieur Hood's entrance, turns heroic exposition into an unwanted theatrical interruption before Fiona destroys the entire routine. These are diegetic songs, meaning the characters can hear them inside the story, and both are interrupted by violence. In Shrek, musical perfection rarely survives contact with an actual person. Then Hallelujah arrives, and the film stops smirking. John Cale's restrained recording accompanies the separation of Shrek and Fiona, while Rufus Wainwright's version appeared on the commercial soundtrack album. The sequence works because the song is not used as a joke or a literal explanation of the plot. Its melancholy gives several characters the same emotional space. Shrek returns to his swamp, Fiona prepares for a loveless marriage, and Donkey witnesses the damage caused by fear and misunderstanding. The editing moves between them, but the music makes their loneliness feel shared. For a movie built on disruption, this moment earns its sadness through complete sincerity. That sincerity makes the final use of "I'm a believer" feel like release rather than soundtrack marketing. Smash Mouth's cover turns the wedding celebration into a modern pop concert, while Eddie Murphy's reprise lets Donkey seize the microphone exactly as we knew he would. The song expresses the ending's emotional argument with shameless simplicity. Shrek believed love was not available to someone like him, and Fiona believed love required her transformation into someone else. Both assumptions collapse. The musical number invites every displaced fairy tale creature into the celebration, replacing Farquaad's controlled pageantry with communal chaos. Nobody stands in formation. That is precisely why it feels alive. The soundtrack's apparent randomness is therefore carefully organized. Pop songs give the movie contemporary attitude. The orchestral score protects its emotional stakes. Comic numbers expose artificial performance, while Hallelujah removes every layer of irony. Sound effects give weight to bodies, fire, and collapsing structures. Silence exposes feelings dialogue tries to avoid. Shrek sounds like a collision between a medieval storybook, a radio station, and a Broadway parody, yet each musical language serves the same idea. Old stories can survive being rewritten. Creating that balance required years of experimentation, and the production journey behind it was nearly as unruly as the film itself. The most revealing description of Shrek's production came from Andrew Adamson, who called it an island of misfit toys. Artists who had not settled comfortably onto other DreamWorks projects were redirected toward the strange ogre movie developing at the edge of the studio's attention. Storyboard artist Conrad Vernon was told the film was struggling and needed help escaping the hole it had fallen into. Editor Sim Evan Jones was assigned to something vaguely called Special Projects. Nobody was behaving as though they were building the foundation of a billion-dollar franchise. They were trying to rescue a production that had not yet decided what kind of movie it wanted to be. Its earliest visual direction was almost unrecognizable. DreamWorks initially explored a hybrid technique involving motion capture, miniature environments, and computer-generated characters. A short test placed performers in suits, with an actor physically approximating Donkey by using his legs and broom-like extensions to represent 4 limbs. J.J. Abrams, years before becoming one of Hollywood's most recognizable filmmakers, reportedly wrote the test material. The experiment produced too much data for the available technology and failed to deliver convincing comedy. Adamson remembered Jeffrey Katzenberg rejecting the result outright. Months of work had led not to a usable foundation, but to proof that the entire approach needed reconsideration. Production designer James Hegedus then proposed combining miniature sets with computer-animated characters. A brief test looked promising, but Adamson wanted environments filled with rolling landscapes and dense background detail. Building that world practically would have limited the film's scale and complicated its movement. PDI, fresh from completing Ants, argued that fully digital environments could eventually reach the same visual standard. The filmmakers agreed to let the studio prove it. That decision pushed Shrek toward complete computer animation, but it also demanded new systems for skin, cloth, hair, liquids, fire, and subtle facial acting, problems the medium had not yet solved comfortably. The story was no more stable than the technology. Team members remembered versions in which Shrek was a gentler figure who wanted to become a knight, a premise that pulled him toward conventional heroism rather than allowing him to reject it. Directors changed. Character designs shifted. Scenes swung between earnest action-adventure and aggressive comedy. Vicki Jensen joined after watching an early screening whose tones seemed to belong to different films. Her instinct was simple. Stop trying to suppress the strange material. The wild storyboards were not the problem. They were the personality the rest of the film needed to embrace. Gradually, the adventure framework became a delivery system for irreverence rather than the dominant tone. The breakthrough apparently came from the fairy tale refugees and the gingerbread man interrogation. Vernon began with a basic production question: how would someone torture a cookie, break off his legs, dunk him in milk, turn a nursery rhyme into a police interrogation? He boarded the scene, performed every role during the pitch and gave Ginji the voice that eventually remained in the finished film. The room reportedly erupted. Suddenly, the crew could hear the movie's comic language. Childhood imagery treated with adult genre logic, played intensely enough to become absurd. After searching unsuccessfully for another performer, the filmmakers asked Vernon to record the role himself. Then the production suffered its most painful disruption. Chris Farley, who had recorded a substantial amount of Shrek's dialogue, died in December 1997. The character had been shaped partly around Farley's physical and comic identity, broad, vulnerable, and more openly innocent than the final ogre. Adamson said the team lost its direction for a considerable period, and that he even asked Katzenberg to fire him because he could not bring himself to leave. Mike Myers' arrival did not simply replace an unfinished voice track. It forced the filmmakers to reconsider Shrek's personality, visual proportions, and emotional defenses. The story itself continued changing alongside the recast. Myers created another expensive turning point after recording Shrek with a heavy Canadian voice. He felt disconnected from the character and argued that a Scottish accent would better express Shrek's working-class identity while contrasting with Farquaad's English authority. DreamWorks resisted restarting yet again, but Myers insisted that he would repeat the work without additional payment. He eventually persuaded Steven Spielberg to let him try. The resulting performance felt more emotionally connected, requiring the production to adapt finished or partially finished animation to new timings and mouth shapes. After years of revisions, the movie's defining voice emerged because an actor was willing to admit that his first complete solution was wrong. Meanwhile, the directors were learning how to manage a production divided between story teams in Southern California and PDI's operation in Palo Alto. Adamson and Jensen split responsibility by sequence, then reviewed one another's progress at the end of each day. Jensen's first major action assignment was the rope bridge crossing, where she had to learn three-dimensional staging while directing animators who were showing her unfinished blocking rather than polished imagery. She recalled being presented with an untextured gray log and asking for bark, only to be told that surface detail would arrive much later. Every object had to pass through separate stages of shape, movement, texture, and lighting. Nothing could simply be carried onto a set. That distance from DreamWorks' central operation strengthened the crew's peculiar independence. Jensen remembered the Palo Alto team, feeling like a small satellite company making entertainment for itself, uncertain whether the result would delight audiences or completely confuse them. Even Adamson and Evan Jones sometimes worked in an overflow catering area at DreamWorks' Glendale campus, editing beside sinks while higher-profile productions occupied conventional animation rooms. The disrespect could have poisoned morale. Instead, it matched the film's subject almost too perfectly. A project treated like an outsider became a story about outsiders discovering that exclusion had given them their own community. The technical pressure remained enormous. PDI had spent years researching believable skin, hair, facial movement, and clothing, building characters from skeleton-like structures outward through simulated muscle, fat, and surface layers. The goal was not photographic realism for its own sake. Adamson pointed to Shrek overhearing Fiona at the windmill, a close-up in which disappointment passes silently across his face, as evidence of what those systems made possible. That scene contains no digital fire or spectacular camera move, just hurt. After all the abandoned tests, rewritten stories, and rebuilt performances, the production's greatest triumph was teaching a computer-generated face how to conceal a broken heart. Nobody involved could confidently predict whether this unstable mixture would connect with the public. It had lost its original star, discarded an early animation process, transformed its central character, and repeatedly changed tone while developing technology fast enough to keep up with its ambitions. Yet those disruptions did not merely delay Shrek. They became the method through which it found itself. The movie survived because its creators kept choosing the stronger idea over the completed work. That persistence was about to receive the clearest judgment Hollywood understands. Not in a storyboard room or rendering queue, but at the box office. Shrek did not merely earn back its production cost. It turned a film once treated like DreamWorks' awkward side project into one of the company's most valuable properties. Public estimates place the production budget between $50 million and $60 million, depending on the database, so any exact profitability calculation deserves caution. Marketing expenses were separate, and studios do not keep every dollar sold at the ticket counter. Even with those qualifications, the commercial outcome was unmistakable. Theatrical revenue reached several times the reported budget before home video, television licensing, merchandise, or sequels entered the equation. The misfit movie had become a blockbuster. DreamWorks launched the film across 587 North American theaters in May 2001. Its first conventional weekend produced $42.35 million, an average of roughly $11,800 per location. That was not merely a strong family film opening. It indicated broad appeal beyond parents looking for something to occupy children. The advertising had sold fairy tale parody, recognizable celebrity voices, and bathroom humor, but audiences discovered a film with enough emotional substance to generate genuine recommendations. Opening weekends reveal marketing power. What happens afterward reveals whether viewers liked what the campaign persuaded them to see. Shrek's subsequent performance became the more impressive story. During its second weekend, Shrek earned approximately $42.48 million, essentially holding flat rather than suffering the decline commonly expected after a wide opening. It did so while Pearl Harbor, one of the year's most heavily promoted live-action spectacles, entered the marketplace. Shrek slipped to second place, but its gross barely moved. Then came $28.17 million in Weekend 3, followed by $16.52 million in Weekend 4. The declines eventually arrived, yet the movie continued earning meaningful amounts deep into the summer. It was not operating on curiosity alone. Families returned, adults recommended it to other adults, and repeat viewings helped turn individual jokes into shared cultural language. That durability produced what box office analysts call legs, the relationship between a film's opening and its final total. The numbers calculates a domestic multiplier of 636, meaning Shrek ultimately earned more than 6 times its biggest weekend in North American theaters. It reached approximately $268.2 million domestically during its original recorded release and another $216. $7 million internationally for about $484.9 million worldwide. Those figures placed it second on the domestic calendar for 2001 and fourth worldwide, behind Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone, The Lord of the Rings. The Fellowship of the Ring and Monsters, Inc. globally. An ogre had survived a year crowded with wizards, hobbits, and Pixar monsters. The domestic result carried particular strategic weight. Shrek finished ahead of Monsters, Inc. in North America, even though Pixar had already established itself through Toy Story, A Bug's Life, and Toy Story 2. DreamWorks had released the computer-animated Ants in 1998, but Shrek demonstrated that the studio could create a digitally animated event with its own recognizable attitude, rather than merely compete on technology. Audiences were not choosing it because computer animation itself was new. They were choosing a specific comic voice, sarcastic, contemporary, and willing to make parents laugh at material children understood differently. That distinction gave DreamWorks something far more valuable than a successful release. It gave the studio a brand identity. The film's commercial reach expanded dramatically when it arrived on VHS and DVD on November 2, 2001. By January 2002, DreamWorks reported that consumers had purchased more than 21 million copies across the two formats, including 7.9 million DVDs in the United States. The release had generated roughly $420 million in consumer spending, while international DVD sales had already passed 2.1 million units across only 7 territories. Those numbers show how perfectly Shrek suited the emerging DVD era. Families could replay it endlessly, adults could notice jokes they had missed, and bonus material could present the film as both children's entertainment and a technical achievement. Home ownership also changed the movie's cultural function. In theaters, laughter is collective but temporary. On disc, lines become rituals. Donkey's chatter, the onion speech, Gingy's interrogation and the Duloc song could be repeated until children knew the timing before the characters spoke. That repetition strengthened demand for sequels and merchandise without requiring DreamWorks to explain the world again. Shrek was no longer just the protagonist of one movie. His face, accent, and silhouette had become instantly marketable symbols. The studio now possessed an expandable universe filled with supporting characters who could carry their own stories. Financial success did not prove every creative choice correct, but it changed which lessons Hollywood extracted from the film. Studios saw evidence that animated features could court adults openly, use pop culture references aggressively, and build soundtracks from contemporary songs without losing family audiences. Many later productions copied the surface ingredients: celebrity voices, sarcasm, dance party endings, while missing the insecurity and tenderness holding Shrek together. That is the strange burden of a commercial breakthrough. The industry often imitates what is easiest to measure rather than what actually made audiences return. The numbers transformed uncertainty into institutional confidence. A production repeatedly rebuilt during development had generated almost $500 million theatrically, dominated home entertainment, and opened an obvious path toward continuation. Yet money alone cannot explain why Shrek endured while many profitable animated films faded. Its wider significance emerged through reviews, awards, and the cultural argument surrounding its irreverence. The box office proved that audiences had embraced the ogre. The critical response would determine whether Hollywood regarded him as a temporary comic novelty or the face of a genuine change in animation. Before Shrek reached ordinary moviegoers, it entered one of cinema's most prestigious rooms wearing muddy boots. The film screened in competition at the 2001 Cannes Film Festival, placing a computer-animated fairy tale comedy alongside international art house directors competing for the Palme d'Or. Cannes officially lists it as an in-competition feature, while contemporary reporting described the selection as the first of its kind for an animated film in nearly 3 decades. That context made the screening feel almost confrontational. A movie opening with toilet humor was asking to be evaluated not merely as children's entertainment, but as cinema. The gamble worked. Audiences laughed, and the industry began taking the ogre more seriously. Critics largely embraced the same contradiction that had challenged the filmmakers throughout production. The movie was rude without becoming cruel, and sentimental without becoming soft. Metacritic currently records a score of 84 from 34 reviews, placing it in the site's universal acclaim category. Rotten Tomatoes franchise ranking lists the original at 89%, while IMDb users currently rate it 7.9 out of 10. Those numbers reflect an unusually broad agreement across professional critics and general audiences. The film's jokes were accessible immediately, but its emotional argument gave reviewers something more durable to admire after the laughter faded. Roger Ebert awarded the film 4 stars and praised the way its advanced animation could appear realistic and fantastical at the same time. His response identified the achievement beneath the publicity. Shrek was not simply displaying smoother skin, denser forests, or more convincing fire. It was using technical sophistication to sell comic personality. The sight of an ogre eating disgusting food works because the materials possess texture. Fiona's private sadness works because her face can hold an expression the dialogue refuses to state. The visuals were impressive, but critics responded because the technology remains subordinate to character. A rendering breakthrough is temporary. An emotionally legible face survives improvements in software. Other reviewers focused on the film's writing and unusual demographic reach. The Guardian praised its cleverness, visual energy, and ability to remain fundamentally wholesome despite jokes aimed over children's heads, though the review stopped short of placing it on the emotional level of Pixar's Toy Story. That comparison followed Shrek everywhere. Pixar represented warmth, narrative precision, and technological leadership. DreamWorks appeared louder, sharper, and more openly commercial. Yet Shrek proved that a different kind of computer-animated film could succeed. It did not imitate Pixar's emotional tone. It built affection through friction. Characters insult one another, misunderstand one another, and somehow become a family before any of them admits that was the goal. The dissenting critics attacked precisely what admirers celebrated. Some found the movie frantic, overfilled with contemporary references, and desperate to prevent even a moment of stillness. Others argued that its moral about inner beauty felt compromised by a production so eager to advertise its own cleverness. Those criticisms are fair. The celebrity impressions, innuendo, and cultural references occasionally date the film more aggressively than its fairy tale foundation does. Certain jokes seem designed to produce recognition rather than reveal character. When every silence risks being filled by another gag, sincerity can start feeling like an interruption instead of the destination. The film's influence would magnify that weakness because imitators copied its noise more easily than its vulnerability. The accusation that Shrek was primarily an attack on Disney also shaped its reception. Duloc's amusement park cleanliness, Farquaad's obsession with perfection, and the mass relocation of storybook characters made the target difficult to miss. Industry history gave the satire additional bite because DreamWorks co-founder Jeffrey Katzenberg had previously led Disney's film division before leaving the company after a bitter power struggle. Yet, reducing the movie to corporate revenge misses why audiences connected with it. Viewers did not need knowledge of executive feuds to understand a world where uncomfortable bodies and personalities are removed to preserve a polished image. The satire worked because the emotional experience beneath it was universal. Awards season converted critical enthusiasm into history. At the 74th Academy Awards on March 24, 2002, Shrek defeated Monsters, Inc. and Jimmy Neutron. Boy Genius to win the inaugural Academy Award for Best Animated Feature. It also received an adapted screenplay nomination, a rarer acknowledgement that the storytelling itself deserved recognition beyond animation technique. The category's creation represented a victory and a complication. Animated features now had guaranteed space at the Oscars, but separating them into their own field also risked reinforcing the idea that they belonged outside the major categories. Shrek's screenplay nomination pushed against that boundary even as its historic win established it. The film's reputation became more complicated as its influence spread. Its success encouraged studios to chase celebrity voice casts, rapid pop culture jokes, ironic fairy tale revisions, and final act dance parties. Eventually, Shrek was blamed for a generation of animated comedies that mistook sarcasm for sophistication. That criticism targets the wrong culprit. The original works because Shrek's cynicism is presented as damage, not wisdom. He must outgrow it. Donkey's comedy hides fear of abandonment, while Fiona's confidence hides shame. Later films often copied the mocking surface without understanding that Shrek ultimately sides with sincerity. Its entire story exists to dismantle the emotional barricade constructed by its own attitude. Internet culture then gave the film another life. Lines, images, and songs became memes. Shrek himself shifted from family film protagonist to an absurd symbol, repeatedly detached from the original narrative. That transformation could have reduced the movie to nostalgic comedy material. Instead, younger audiences kept rediscovering the emotional core behind the cultural noise. The animation has aged unevenly, and some references now feel trapped in 2001, but the central relationships remain clear. Donkey still refuses to abandon someone pushing him away. Fiona still fears that honesty will destroy love. Shrek still mistakes isolation for safety. Those wounds do not expire when rendering technology improves. Critical approval, awards recognition, and decades of quotation established that Shrek was more than a successful parody. It changed how mainstream animation sounded, how aggressively it addressed adults, and which kinds of bodies could occupy the center of a fairy tale. But influence is not the same as greatness, and popularity is not a final verdict. To understand why the film remains emotionally alive beneath the memes, sequels, and imitations, we have to return to its deepest questions. Who gets called beautiful? Why rejection creates cruelty, and whether love changes the body or simply changes the way the body is seen. The film's ending, which this discussion will examine in full, contains its entire philosophy in one transformation. Fiona expects true love's kiss to restore the beautiful human body she believes she was supposed to possess. The magic works, light surrounds her, and the curse becomes permanent. But she remains an ogre. For a moment, she is confused. This cannot be the promised result. Shrek looks at her and says she is beautiful. That exchange rewrites the meaning of true form. Love has not corrected Fiona's body. It has corrected the belief that her body required correction. The happy ending is not transformation into perfection. It is freedom from the need to transform. That reversal gives Shrek more thematic weight than its reputation for crude jokes might suggest. Most fairy tales make physical appearance function like moral evidence. Beauty indicates goodness. Ugliness suggests corruption, danger, or punishment. Shrek understands that children absorb those associations long before they can explain them. Its answer is not to claim that appearance never matters. Every major character has been shaped by how others see them. Shrek expects disgust. Fiona anticipates rejection. Farquaad builds an empire large enough to conceal his insecurity. The film argues that appearance has power because society repeatedly assigns meaning to it, and that intimacy begins when those inherited meanings are challenged. Shrek's onion metaphor is the story's clearest symbol because it works in several directions. Ogress have layers, but layers also protect what is vulnerable underneath. Each sarcastic remark adds another barrier between Shrek and possible rejection. His swamp functions the same way. It is a genuine home, yet it is also a defensive border where nobody can approach without permission. When the fairy tale creatures invade, Shrek treats their presence as the destruction of his peace. In reality, they expose how fragile that peace has always been. Solitude has protected him from humiliation, but it has also prevented anyone from contradicting his belief that he is fundamentally unwanted. Donkey becomes the contradiction Shrek cannot remove. He ignores warnings, crosses boundaries, and treats hostility as an obstacle rather than a verdict. That behavior is funny because it is socially disastrous, but it also represents the film's idea of friendship, staying long enough to recognize pain beneath unpleasant behavior. Donkey does not magically heal Shrek. He confronts him, insults him, and eventually refuses to indulge his self-pity. Their argument after Fiona's departure matters, because Donkey finally identifies Shrek's central flaw. Other people have judged him unfairly, but he has begun using that history as permission to judge everyone else first. Hurt explains his cruelty. It does not excuse it. Fiona's journey mirrors his without simply repeating it. Shrek hides emotional softness beneath an intimidating body. Fiona hides an ogre's body beneath rehearsed femininity. Her curse divides her existence into socially approved daylight and shameful darkness. Sunset becomes more than a magical deadline. It represents the exhausting point when performance can no longer be maintained. Her panic is not really about becoming an ogre. It is about being seen becoming one. The distinction cuts deep. Fiona already knows how to fight, laugh loudly, eat messily, and survive outside a castle. What she lacks is permission to believe those qualities can coexist with desirability. Farquaad offers the opposite response to insecurity. Rather than retreating from society, he redesigns society around his wound. Duloc eliminates disorder because disorder reminds him that control is incomplete. Fairy tale creatures are displaced not for anything they have done, but because their bodies and behavior disrupt his manufactured image of perfection. The satire is broad, yet the underlying mechanism is recognizable. Authoritarian power often begins by defining certain people as visually or culturally incompatible with the ideal community. Farquaad calls Shrek a monster while torturing prisoners, arranging a politically useful marriage, and treating citizens as decorative objects. The supposedly civilized figure becomes the film's least humane character. The movie's deepest conflict is therefore not beauty against ugliness. It is performance against recognition. Farquaad performs greatness. Fiona performs perfection. Shrek performs indifference. Even Donkey performs constant cheerfulness to keep loneliness from catching up with him. Love enters when those performances fail. That is why the quiet scenes matter more than the parody. The jokes dismantle fairy tale conventions, but vulnerability rebuilds the story afterward. Shrek does not end by declaring that romance is foolish. It ends with a wedding. It does not reject happily ever after. It argues that the phrase belongs to people who were excluded from its traditional imagery. Its weaknesses are real. Some celebrity references and contemporary jokes feel attached to 2001 rather than rooted in character. The animation, groundbreaking in its moment, now shows its age in crowd movement, human facial surfaces, and certain environmental details. The film can also rush past emotional consequences whenever another gag becomes available. Fiona's years of isolation and Shrek's history of mistreatment could support deeper exploration than the brisk runtime allows. Yet the economy is also part of the appeal. The movie moves quickly, trusts its emotional symbols, and refuses to let seriousness harden into self-importance. Its influence proved enormous and occasionally unfortunate. Later animated comedies copied the celebrity casting, pop soundtrack, sarcastic dialogue, and celebratory dance ending, often without reproducing the emotional wounds that made those ingredients meaningful. Shrek itself received the first Academy Award for Best Animated Feature and an Adapted Screenplay nomination, helping establish animation as both a major commercial force and a form worthy of broader writing recognition. In 2020, the Library of Congress selected it for the National Film Registry, placing the once disreputable ogre comedy among films preserved for their cultural, historical, or aesthetic importance. The franchise remains active rather than merely nostalgic. DreamWorks still presents Shrek as one of its defining properties, and its official franchise site currently lists Shrek 5 for theatrical release on June 30th, 2027. That longevity was not created by memes alone. Audiences return because the original movie offers a fantasy rare enough to remain powerful, not becoming better looking, more respectable, or easier for society to accept, but finding people whose presence makes those demands lose their authority. My verdict is 9 out of 10. Shrek is not flawless, and parts of its comedy have aged more visibly than its admirers sometimes admit. But its construction is smarter than the noise surrounding it. The voice acting gives psychological detail to broad characters. The design turns locations into arguments. The music moves effortlessly between mockery and sincerity. Most importantly, the film understands that cynicism is only interesting when something tender is trapped beneath it. Shrek arrived pretending to destroy the fairy tale. What it actually did was rescue the form from its narrowest assumptions and make room at the wedding for everyone previously banished from the kingdom.